One day in 1943, Rosa Parks boarded a city bus in her hometown of Montgomery, Alabama, and she did what she always did. She paid the required fare at the front of the bus. This particular day, though, she just walked directly towards the back of the bus, and there was a white person sitting in the front of the bus, and so the bus driver, by the name of James Blake, stopped her and told her that she would have to follow the rules. The rule back then was if there were any white people sitting on the front of the bus and you were a person of color, you were to walk to the front of the bus, walk up through the door, put your fare in, and if there was any white folks at all, then you had to get off the bus, walk all the way outside to the back of the bus, and then enter the back, because out of respect for the white folks, they shouldn't have to look at people of color, for goodness sake. Well, Rosa Parks did what the bus driver told her to do, and so she walked back to the front of the bus, got off the bus, and as she was walking outside to the back to get back on, he slammed both doors shut and took off without her. And she never forgot that day. But from that point on, she always followed the rules. She walked to the front of the bus, got up, stepped up to onto the platform, put in the required fare. If there was any white folks, she got off and walked to the back. She did what she was supposed to do, and she always sat behind the sign that said colored. Well, one day, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was doing just that, paid her fare, walked to the very first seat behind the colored sign, and she thought all was well. But they got to a particular stop along the bus route, and there were a few white people standing up, and there were all the black people in the colored section sitting down. So James Blake got up from the front of the bus, walked back, and moved the colored sign so that Rosa Parks and the three other people that had been sitting in the colored section would have to get up and make room for the white folks. And the three other black people got up and moved. Rosa Parks also moved. She moved closer to the window. In fact, she was saying, "Not on your life. I put up with enough." And so James Blake literally moved the sign behind her and said, "You have to move." And she said, "I don't think I should have to move." So he called the police. Bus wasn't going anywhere. The police came and arrested her, and she had to spend some time in jail, and she was arrested for disorderly conduct because what was once the colored section was now officially the white section. And she said, as she thought back over that day many years later, "I felt a determination coming over me like a warm quilt on a winter night." There was nothing that was going to move her until she was able to let everyone around her know that that bus policy was wrong. Well, Rosa Parks ended up spending quite a bit of time struggling with that decision. However, what was really interesting was that as I was reading this week about Martin Luther King Jr., one of the things that I read was that very act of her refusing to stand up from the bus seat was the thing that energized him into the civil rights movement. And it made me think that we often give a lot of attention to people like Martin Luther King Jr., who was a fantastic orator, an incredible community builder. He knew how to speak to people and how to motivate people and move them en masse to do things that they couldn't do on their own. But Rosa Parks was really just an ordinary person. She was a seamstress, in fact, at a department store. She wasn't really well educated to speak of. She didn't make lots of money. She was actually pretty poor. And she was just your ordinary person going to work, doing manual labor, going home. But she really did change the world in a significant way. She certainly changed our country by that one act of determination and courage by just saying, "I'm not going to stand up. I don't have to. If they're going to make me stand up, if they want me to stand up, they're going to have to make me." And as I thought about how one ordinary person made such a difference, it occurred to me that many of us think of ourselves as just ordinary people. Who am I to make that much of a difference in the world? But over and over again throughout the scriptures and throughout history, we see ordinary people doing ordinary things, and sometimes with a bit of courage and determination, making a huge difference. And so today I want us to look at the Gospel of John, which Joanne just read for us. And in the Gospel of John, we see that very same thing with Andrew. Now I need to give you a little background here, because last week we looked at John the Baptist in the Gospel of Matthew. And this week we're looking at John the Baptist and Jesus in the Gospel of John. And comparing those two, you would think that we're not even talking about the same person. So for those of you that may not have been in church last week or didn't go online to see the sermon, last week I was explaining about how Matthew's point at the beginning of his gospel was talking about the marginalization of people and how God still embraced the people that were way out on the furthest margins of society. The people that nobody else considered very important. Jesus went out of his way to embrace those people. And the beginning of Matthew talks about how Jesus did that because that was God's plan. That was God's will. And John the Baptist was portrayed as one of those marginalized people. In fact, I talked about how the shepherds were marginalized people. The Magi were marginalized people. Mary and Joseph were actually very marginalized, and so was Jesus when he was born. And then, when Matthew introduces John the Baptist, he's seen as the most marginalized of them all. He's out there living in the wilderness, eating bugs and honey, and wearing camel hair because that's all he can afford. Talk about marginalized. But John, the Gospel of John, treats John the Baptist as almost a hero from the start. He is the key witness to the coming of Jesus. He's the one that's pointing to Jesus and preparing for Jesus and getting people ready for Jesus. So when Jesus arrives on the scene, he's already got an audience and he's already got some followers and the message has already gotten started. So John the Baptist is actually seen as a really significant, prominent, important person in the Gospel of John. And then, of course, Jesus is in the story as well. And basically, we have three really significant key players in John's gospel at this point, where we read this morning. You've got John the Baptist, who's pointing the way to Jesus. You've got Jesus himself, and then you've got God. And God is there blessing all that John the Baptist is doing and all that Jesus is doing. So now let's turn to those who are the ordinary people. Because God's not the ordinary one, Jesus isn't the ordinary one, and in the Gospel of John, John the Baptist isn't the ordinary one. So here's how the story goes. John the Baptist one day was kind of hanging out with two of his followers or disciples. And he sees Jesus coming and walking by. And he says, "Look, the Lamb of God." And apparently that's all it took for these two followers to say to John, "See you later." And they started following Jesus. And they became some of Jesus' first followers. One of those people was Andrew. And we really don't know much about Andrew from the scriptures. The one thing we do know is that he was a fisherman. Well, actually, we know a couple things. He was a fisherman, and he was also the brother of Peter, known at the time as Simon, and he's also known as Simon Peter. So Andrew decides, with this other unnamed person, to leave John the Baptist and start following Jesus, and he spent an entire day with him and realized in his mind, this is the Messiah. This is the anointed one, the Christ. And so when he's done spending that day with Jesus, and he comes to this conclusion, in John's gospel it says the first thing he does is he goes to his brother Simon, or Simon Peter, and he says, "We have found the Messiah." And he literally brings Peter to Jesus, and Peter all of a sudden realizes that Jesus is the one that they've been waiting for. So now wrap your head around this. Two fishermen, probably not very well educated at the time, following John the Baptist because he's got a good message. Simon Peter and Andrew are about as ordinary as you can get. Now, Peter goes on to be in the spotlight. In fact, he is one of Jesus' closest disciples and seems to be one of the three that spends the most time with Jesus. And then Peter is one of the significant leaders in the early church and gets the church started. In fact, he's so big in the Catholic Church that Catholics say that he was the first pope. So look at this. this ordinary fisherman in his lifetime becoming Pope. But I want to focus a little more attention on Andrew. Andrew seems to always be ordinary, and yet he's always there. He keeps showing up, working behind the scenes like most people, and making sure that things are happening with the gifts that he has. So Andrew is never one of those spotlight people like his brother Peter, or so many that have these great oratory skills or who also know how to mobilize people and motivate people. But one of the things, there's one of the things I picked out of reading through John and reading about Andrew. Andrew was a connector. Andrew's gift was connecting people, not out front in the spotlight, but he connected Jesus with Peter. He said, Peter, come on, you've got to meet him. And just think of what it would have been like if Peter had never met Jesus. Andrew's role was phenomenally important. And yet we often forget about Andrew. And so today, I want us to realize that because of Andrew, Jesus had the disciples that he had. Because of Andrew, Peter, St. Peter, is known today as St. Peter. Because of Andrew, many other people were connected to Jesus, and then later, after the death and resurrection of Jesus, I'm sure he continued connecting people. In fact, there's evidence of that in the book of Acts. There were people constantly connecting behind the scenes. They weren't the upfront people, they weren't the most educated people, but they were the people that got stuff done. And my guess is, as I think about most of the people I know, most of us think of ourselves as pretty ordinary people, not the extraordinary ones. And yet, think about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. Tomorrow, as we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, I hope that you will give thanks for his presence and the gifts that he brought, for his education, for his oratory skills, for his ability to get people together and motivate them en masse to make a huge difference in the world. But I hope you will also remember people like Rosa Parks, who was one of those quiet, humble people behind the scenes that never really wanted the spotlight, that just kept doing what she did because that was her gift to the world. And think about this. If Rosa Parks hadn't done what she had done, Martin Luther King Jr. may have never been motivated to do what he did. So whatever your gifts are, use them. Whatever the gifts are of the people around you, celebrate them. It doesn't matter what those gifts are. The world needs your gift. Whatever gifts that you have to bring. As I think about Rosa Parks, I often think that sometimes when we're doing something significant, we get frustrated. We get sometimes just kind of burnt out. It's like, well, is what we're doing really making a difference? And can I take it anymore? So we all know about Rosa Parks refusing to stand up from that bus seat. One of the things I learned this week, though, is that she suffered a lot because of that in her lifetime. In fact, she lost her job because of what she did. All of a sudden, this poor woman was unemployed, and everybody in Montgomery seemed to know who she was, and nobody wanted to hire her. And her husband, actually, he was told by his boss, you're never allowed to talk about your wife to any other employees, and you're never allowed to talk about the ongoing lawsuit, because basically, she had appealed once she was convicted of disorderly conduct. And his job was made really difficult, so he ended up quitting. The two of them moved to Virginia for a short while and then to Michigan, where things were much better in many ways. But she really suffered a lot because of that act of determination. She also received multiple death threats over and over and over again. But she was determined in her own way to make a difference and to keep moving forward even though times got really tough for her. When I think of Rosa Parks, I just think she's like most of us. She's a person that just is average, wants to do a good deed in the world, but wondering what she can do. And yet, because of her courage and determination, she made a huge difference. Now, I don't know what huge difference I'm going to make in the world or any of you, but I do know that Martin Luther King Jr. did make a big difference, but never on his own. Because behind Martin Luther King Jr., there were thousands, many thousands of people just like Rosa Parks, just doing the simple things that they did as ordinary people. And because of that, segregation is not only no longer allowed on the buses in Montgomery, Alabama, but nowhere in this country. In fact, segregation has been outlawed not just in buses, but at fountains, drinking fountains, schools, neighborhoods, and the list goes on. It's because all the ordinary people together also did what they were supposed to do. So my invitation to you today is to think about what gift it is that you have. It might seem like something really simple, but what is it that you have that you can give to the church, or that you can give to the world, or that you can give to your community? It might get a little tough sometimes, like it got for Rosa Parks. But when she died in 2005, she died in Michigan as a very poor woman. And as I read about her life today, the last couple of days, I realized that she died so poor because almost everything she made, she gave away to charity. She received a lot from her books, from her memoir, for her autobiography, her speaking engagements. Almost everything she got, she gave away. And when she died in her 90s in 2005, she died a hero, really, for all of us. Not because she was this extraordinary person necessarily, but because she was so ordinary. But with her ordinary life, she made a huge, huge difference. And that gives hope to me, and I hope it gives hope to you as well. Amen.